The deafening silence that followed Elizabeth Morgan's laughter echoed through the private hangar. All eyes shifted between her, the immaculate CEO of Morgan Aviation, and Jack Harlow, the grease-stained mechanic who had dared suggest he could fix the Gulfstream's malfunctioning engine. "A local garage mechanic thinks he understands aerospace engineering," Elizabeth's voice dripped with contempt. "This isn't changing oil in family sedans, Mr. Harlow. That's a $15 million Pratt Whitney engine. I need certified engineers, not—" Her eyes lingered on his worn coveralls. "Overconfident handymen playing with toys they don't understand." What Elizabeth Morgan couldn't see beneath those stained coveralls was the man Jack Harlow had once been, and still was, despite everything life had thrown at him. At 38, Jack's weathered hands told stories his lips rarely shared. 5 years ago, he'd abandoned his prestigious career to become the full-time father his daughter Lily needed after her mother's unexpected death. The small town of Westridge offered something his former life couldn't: stability, affordable living, and enough time to be present for his daughter. Each morning began at 5 a.m. in their modest 2-bedroom apartment above the local diner. Jack would prepare Lily's lunch, help her with last-minute homework, and drop her at school before heading to Miller's auto shop, where he'd rebuilt his life from scratch. His colleagues respected his uncanny ability to diagnose mechanical problems no one else could solve, though none knew the source of his talents. Evenings were sacred: dinner together, helping with homework, listening to Lily's stories about middle school drama. At 12, she was brilliant and resilient, carrying her mother's smile and her father's quiet determination. The wall of their small living room displayed Lily's academic certificates rather than Jack's carefully hidden credentials. Only in the quiet hours after Lily went to bed did Jack allow himself to remember. Sometimes he'd take out the small metal box containing his old life, photographs, medals, and a single letter folded with precision. The box remained locked, much like the parts of himself he'd sealed away. He'd made peace with his choices. The respect he'd once commanded, the thrill of pushing boundaries in engineering. He'd traded it all for something more precious, being the father Lily deserved. If that meant enduring the dismissive glances of people like Elizabeth Morgan, so be it. Pride was a luxury single parents couldn't always afford. Elizabeth Morgan had earned her reputation as the Ice Queen of Aviation through meticulous precision and uncompromising standards. At 42, she'd transformed her father's struggling charter service into Morgan Aviation, one of the Northeast's premier private aviation companies, catering to executives and celebrities who demanded nothing but perfection. Her corner office, overlooking the Morgan Aviation hangar, featured no family photos, only awards, business magazine covers, and a scale model of their flagship Gulfstream G650. The daughter of a military pilot turned entrepreneur, Elizabeth had graduated summa cum laude from MIT before earning her MBA at Harvard. Her father's unexpected death had thrust her into leadership at 29, and she'd spent the subsequent years proving herself in an industry dominated by men twice her age. Elizabeth's days were choreographed with military precision: 5 a.m. workouts with her personal trainer, breakfast meetings, operational reviews, client calls, and strategy sessions that often stretched past midnight. Her assistant knew better than to schedule anything during her Thursday evening flying time, the only moments when Elizabeth truly felt free, piloting her personal Cirrus SR-22 through the New England skies. Relationships were casualties of her ambition. 2 broken engagements had taught her that partnership required compromise, something that didn't align with her pursuit of excellence. Her closest companion was her British short-hair cat, Churchill, who demanded little beyond premium food and occasional attention. What few people recognized beneath Elizabeth's polished exterior was the constant pressure she placed upon herself. Her father's voice echoed in her mind during every decision: Morgan Aviation accepts nothing less than excellence. This mantra had built her success, but also constructed walls around her that few had ever penetrated. Vulnerability was weakness, and Elizabeth Morgan had eliminated weakness from her life through sheer force of will. The emergency call came at 3:42 p.m. on a stormy Friday afternoon. Elizabeth was reviewing quarterly projections when her operations director burst into her office without knocking, an unprecedented breach of protocol that immediately signaled the severity of the situation. The Sullivan party's G650 has engine issues. They're grounded in West Ridge. His voice was tight with tension. The diagnostics are inconclusive, and our nearest certified team is in Boston, at least 4 hours out, with this weather. Elizabeth felt her stomach tighten. The Sullivan party was actually tech billionaire James Sullivan, his family, and board members en route to a crucial meeting in Chicago. Sullivan wasn't just their highest-paying client. He was considering a partnership that would expand Morgan Aviation nationally. "Get our emergency response team on a helicopter immediately," Elizabeth commanded, already reaching for her coat. "Can't. Air traffic's grounded everything below 10,000 feet due to the storm system," he hesitated. "Sullivan's demanding a solution in the next 2 hours, or he's calling competitors." Elizabeth's mind calculated rapidly. "I'll drive there myself. Have the hangar prepare my Range Rover and send the engineering schematics to my tablet. I can be there in 90 minutes. The drive to Westridge Regional Airport was a blur of hands-free calls and contingency planning. By the time Elizabeth arrived, rain hammering against her windshield, she'd arranged for parts to be couriered from 3 different locations and had the company's lead engineer on standby for video consultation. The scene at the small regional airport was worse than she'd anticipated. Sullivan's security detail surrounded the Gulfstream while the billionaire himself paced near the terminal building, gesturing angrily during a phone call. Elizabeth recognized the body language. He was already talking to competitors. Inside the hangar, the local maintenance crew looked overwhelmed by the sophisticated aircraft. Their supervisor approached her nervously. "Ms. Morgan, we've run standard diagnostics, but this is beyond our certification level. The computer's throwing multiple error codes, and I understand." "My team will handle it from here," she interrupted, scanning the room for the crate of specialized tools she'd requested. Instead, her eyes landed on a familiar figure in coveralls, examining the exposed engine housing with unsettling familiarity. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, recognizing the mechanic from Miller's auto shop. They'd crossed paths once when her Porsche had broken down outside of Westridge. "Jack, he was called in because he's got a knack for—" "This isn't a carburetor problem," Elizabeth snapped. "Get him away from that engine before he causes more damage." Jack straightened, wiping his hands on a shop rag. His face remained impassive despite her obvious disdain. "The fault isn't mechanical," he said quietly. "It's in the digital fuel management system. There's a programming conflict between the latest software update and the emergency protocols." Elizabeth felt heat rising to her face. "And you determine this how? By checking its oil level." A flash of something, perhaps hurt, perhaps anger, crossed his features before disappearing behind professional neutrality. "Just an observation," he replied, stepping back. Elizabeth turned her attention to the aircraft, connecting her tablet to the onboard systems. Within minutes, her own diagnostics confirmed exactly what Jack had suggested. The realization only irritated her further. Lucky guess, she told herself, refusing to acknowledge the alternative, that she'd dismiss someone with genuine insight. As rain pounded against the hangar roof and Sullivan's impatient figure appeared in the doorway, Elizabeth faced an uncomfortable truth. She needed a solution immediately, and her options were rapidly diminishing. Pride and protocol dictated waiting for her certified team, but business reality demanded immediate action. Sullivan's entrance into the hangar created immediate tension. His reputation for ruthlessness in business was matched only by his impatience with incompetence. "Here, Elizabeth," he greeted coolly. "My board members are currently searching for alternative transportation. You have precisely 47 minutes before I formalize that decision." Elizabeth maintained her professional composure despite the public ultimatum. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand your frustration. We've identified the issue and are implementing a solution as we speak." This was at best a partial truth. She'd identified the problem, but lacked the immediate means to resolve the software conflict without her specialized team. As she turned back toward the aircraft, she noticed Jack quietly gathering his tools to leave. Something in his deliberate movements caught her attention. The precise way he organized his equipment, so unlike the haphazard approach of most mechanics she'd encountered. Making a decision she hoped wouldn't destroy her company's reputation, Elizabeth approached him. "You mentioned a programming conflict," she said, lowering her voice. "Explain." Jack hesitated, measuring his response. The emergency fuel bypass system is reading the new software as a threat and creating a feedback loop. The engine's fine, but the computer is forcing it into safety mode. His explanation aligned perfectly with what her own diagnostics had shown. Elizabeth weighed her limited options before asking, "Can you fix it?" "Yes," he said simply. "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Elizabeth studied him, searching for any hint of overconfidence or deception. Finding none, she made her decision. "Do it," she said, then added, "I'll be watching every move." Jack nodded once, retrieving his tablet from his worn backpack. Elizabeth was surprised to see it was an advanced industrial model, not the consumer device she'd expected. He connected it to the aircraft's diagnostic port with practiced efficiency, his fingers moving across the screen with unexpected precision. What followed was a masterclass in methodical problem-solving. Jack didn't waste movements or words as he navigated through the aircraft systems. Elizabeth observed with growing bewilderment as he accessed protocols that even her senior technicians approached with caution. When he encountered a security restriction, he glanced at her. "I need authorization." Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before entering her override codes, a decision that violated company protocol but felt inexplicably right. Jack continued working, occasionally murmuring notes to himself in technical language that few outside the aerospace industry would comprehend. Sullivan approached, watching the progress with skeptical interest. "You're certified engineer?" Before Elizabeth could respond, Jack intervened smoothly. "Just finishing the final bypass sequence, sir. You'll be airborne within 15 minutes after standard safety checks." The authority in his voice was so natural that Sullivan simply nodded, accepting the assessment without question, something Elizabeth had rarely witnessed from the demanding billionaire. True to his word, 13 minutes later, Jack disconnected his tablet. "Try it now." The engine started perfectly, its smooth hum filling the hangar. The aerolights remained dark. Sullivan's pilot ran through his checklist, his expression shifting from doubt to relief. "All systems nominal," the pilot confirmed. "Whatever you did, it worked." Elizabeth found herself in the unusual position of being upstaged in her own element. Jack had solved in minutes what would have taken her team hours, potentially saving Morgan Aviation's most important client relationship. Yet instead of highlighting his achievement, Jack simply packed his tools, his demeanor betraying no desire for recognition or praise. This quiet confidence, Elizabeth reluctantly admitted to herself, was more impressive than any boasting could have been. The crisis averted, Elizabeth found herself in the uncomfortable position of owing gratitude to someone she'd publicly dismissed. Sullivan and his entourage were conducting final preparations for departure, their earlier hostility replaced by the satisfied demeanor of valued clients. "Morgan," Sullivan called as he prepared to board. "Your emergency response was adequate. Our meeting next week stands." Coming from him, this constituted high praise. Elizabeth nodded graciously, relief washing through her. Only after Sullivan's attention turned elsewhere did she search the hangar for Jack, intending to offer the professional acknowledgement his work deserved and perhaps secure his discretion about her initial treatment of him. She found him in the small break room, washing engine grease from his hands. His coveralls were partially unzipped in the warmth of the room, revealing a simple white t-shirt beneath. As he reached for a paper towel, the sleeve of his t-shirt shifted, exposing part of what appeared to be a tattoo on his upper arm. Elizabeth wouldn't normally have paid attention to a mechanic's tattoo, but something about the visible portion, precise geometric lines rather than typical decorative art, caught her trained eye. When Jack turned slightly, she glimpsed more of the design and froze in disbelief. It wasn't decorative at all. The partially visible tattoo was an engineering schematic. One she recognized instantly as the cross-sectional design of the Pratt & Whitney PW1000G geared turbofan engine, complete with annotation markers. Not the kind of image one gets on impulse or for aesthetic reasons. It was the mark of someone who lived and breathed aerospace engineering at the highest level. "That tattoo," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "Where did you get it?" Jack stiffened, quickly adjusting his sleeve to cover the design. A reminder of another life, he replied, his tone making it clear he considered the subject closed. But Elizabeth Morgan hadn't built an aviation empire by respecting conversational boundaries. She stepped closer, corporate protocol forgotten in her sudden need to understand. That's the PW1-1000G schematic, the proprietary version with the modified gear ratio that never went into commercial production. Her eyes narrowed. Only 15 engineers worldwide had access to those specifications. Something shifted in Jack's expression. Resignation mixed with the flicker of the man he'd once been. 16, he corrected quietly. I led the team that designed the modification. Elizabeth's mind raced, connecting impossible dots. That was Threshold Aerospace's classified project with the military. Jack Harlow. The name finally registered. Dr. Jonathan Harlow? The propulsion systems pioneer? The recognition in her voice seemed to unlock something. Jack glanced around to ensure they were alone before responding. That was a long time ago. You disappeared from the industry 5 years ago. There were rumors of a government project gone wrong or corporate espionage or... My wife died, he interrupted, his voice carrying the finality of a hangar door closing. Brain aneurysm. No warning. One day Emma was helping our daughter with homework. The next day I was planning a funeral and becoming a single parent overnight. The stark simplicity of his explanation struck Elizabeth silent. In her world of corporate machinations and strategic career moves, she'd imagined elaborate professional conspiracies behind his disappearance, not profound personal tragedy. Lily was 7, he continued, something compelling him to explain after years of silence. She needed stability more than I needed achievement, so I chose her. Sold our house in Virginia, cashed out my patents, moved somewhere quiet where my salary wasn't tied to 100-hour work weeks and international travel. As he spoke, Elizabeth noticed a small photograph tucked inside his wallet on the counter. A smiling girl with her father's thoughtful eyes and determined chin. The same eyes that had assessed the Gulfstream's engine with such natural authority. The revelation rewrote everything she thought she understood about the man standing before her. Not an overconfident small-town mechanic, but one of the most brilliant aerospace engineers of his generation who had walked away from fame and fortune to become something more important, a present father. Elizabeth Morgan, who had built her life on professional achievement at all costs, found herself facing a man who had made the opposite choice. And suddenly, uncomfortably, she wasn't certain which of them had chosen correctly. The Sullivan jet departed without further incident, disappearing into clearing skies as Elizabeth stood on the tarmac. Normally, she would have immediately begun the drive back to headquarters, already planning how to leverage this successful crisis management with other clients. Instead, she found herself lingering, her thoughts circling back to the man whose existence had upended her carefully constructed worldview. In the quiet airport cafe, Elizabeth sat with an untouched coffee, scrolling through her phone. A quick search confirmed everything. Dr. Jonathan Jack Harlow, MIT doctorate at 26, key patents in advanced propulsion systems, recipient of the Aerospace Engineering Medal of Excellence. Article after article from 5 years prior questioned his sudden departure from Threshold Aerospace, with speculation ranging from burnout to classified government projects. None mentioned the truth, a widower choosing fatherhood over professional legacy. The last photograph she found showed a younger, clean-shaven Jack in a pressed suit, accepting an award at an international symposium. His expression held the confident assurance of someone who knew his worth and his place in the world. The same expression she practiced in her mirror each morning. Elizabeth closed the browser, uncomfortable with her invasive research, yet unable to reconcile the brilliant engineer with the man in worn coveralls who now tuned engines in a local garage. Had he truly found peace in this small-town existence? Or was his expertise slowly withering, a criminal waste of exceptional talent? As her coffee grew cold, Elizabeth confronted a more disturbing question. What did Jack Harlow's choices reveal about her own? She had sacrificed relationships, free time, and personal connections in service to Morgan Aviation's growth. Her father's approval, still sought years after his death, had been her North Star. Yet today, She'd witnessed a man who had walked away from professional acclaim that even she could only aspire to, and he'd done it without apparent regret. The cafe door opened, and Jack entered with a young girl beside him. Lily, Elizabeth presumed, recognizing her from the photograph. Jack hadn't noticed Elizabeth in the corner booth, his attention focused entirely on his daughter as she animatedly described something using enthusiastic hand gestures. The tenderness in his expression as he listened was so genuine it made Elizabeth glance away, feeling like an intruder on something precious. She observed them ordering hot chocolates, Jack's patient interaction with the cashier, the easy comfort between father and daughter. The scene triggered an unexpected memory. Her own father, perpetually busy building his company, missing her science fair presentation where she demonstrated a model jet engine. She'd won first place, but had driven home alone with her blue ribbon, her achievement acknowledged later with a distracted nod and a comment about Morgan potential. Elizabeth had internalized that moment, determining that if excellence couldn't earn her father's presence, she would at least earn his professional respect. She'd succeeded, but watching Jack with his daughter, she wondered about the cost of structuring her entire existence around achievement rather than connection. When Jack finally noticed her, surprise flickered across his features before he nodded in polite acknowledgement. Elizabeth returned the gesture, suddenly reluctant to intrude on their time together. The questions burning inside her about his work, his choices, how he reconciled his brilliant mind with mundane mechanical tasks, could wait. As she gathered her things to leave, Elizabeth realized something unsettling. For the first time in her adult life, she envied someone not for their success or status, but for their apparent peace. Jack Harlow had walked away from the very things she had sacrificed everything to achieve, and the inexplicable result seemed to be contentment. She couldn't comprehend. The call came 3 weeks later as Elizabeth was leaving a board meeting where Morgan Aviation's expansion plans had received unanimous approval. Her operations director's voice carried uncharacteristic urgency. The test flight for the modified Gulfstream? There's been an incident. No casualties, but they're grounded at Westridge again with engine trouble. Initial diagnostics show it's related to the custom modifications we installed last month. Elizabeth felt her chest tighten. The modified Gulfstream represented a substantial investment, a showcase aircraft intended to demonstrate Morgan Aviation's technical prowess to potential military contract partners. Contact our engineering team in Boston, she directed, already heading toward her car. That's the problem, he replied. The modifications were proprietary. Our regular team isn't certified on the custom systems. The only engineer with clearance is in Europe until tomorrow. Elizabeth made a swift decision, one that had been forming in her subconscious since the Sullivan incident. I'll handle this personally. 90 minutes later, she pulled into Miller's auto shop in Westridge, her Aston Martin looking distinctly out of place among the pickup trucks and family sedans. The receptionist's eyes widened at Elizabeth's tailored suit, an unmistakable air of authority. I need to speak with Jack Harlow, Elizabeth stated, foregoing pleasantries. Jack emerged from beneath a lifted Subaru, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Recognition dawned immediately, followed by wariness. Miss Morgan? Another luxury car problem? A jet problem, actually. She maintained her professional demeanor despite the audience of curious mechanics. May I speak with you privately? In the small break room, Elizabeth explained the situation with technical precision, professional to professional. The modified thrust vectoring system is showing cascading failures. We have 24 hours before the demonstration for the military procurement team. Jack listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing. When she finished, he asked only, "Why come to me?" The question was fair. Elizabeth chose honesty, foreign as it felt. Because you're the best qualified person within 100 miles, and because I've seen how you solve problems. He seemed to weigh her words, absently rubbing the spot on his arm where she knew the engine schematic was tattooed. I have responsibilities here, and Lily, your daughter is welcome to wait in our client lounge. It has excellent Wi-Fi for homework. Elizabeth found herself adding, and I've authorized expedited payment at triple your normal consultation rate. Something like amusement flickered in Jack's eyes. You researched my hourly rate at Miller's? I research everything, Mr. Harlow. It's why Morgan Aviation succeeds. After a moment's consideration, Jack nodded. Let me speak with my boss and call Lily's after-school program. At the airfield, their collaboration revealed a side of Elizabeth few ever witnessed. She worked alongside Jack in the hangar, her suit jacket exchanged for Morgan Aviation coveralls, her usual commanding presence replaced by focused partnership. Together, they disassembled the complex modification, identifying the fault in the custom hydraulic system. What surprised Elizabeth wasn't Jack's technical brilliance, she'd expected that, but rather how effectively they worked together. He neither dominated nor deferred, treating her as an equal, despite her comparative lack of hands-on experience with the system. When she suggested a modification to his approach, he considered it thoughtfully before incorporating her insight, acknowledging its value with simple professional respect. By evening, as they tested the repaired system, Elizabeth realized this was the most intellectually satisfying collaboration she'd experienced in years. There was something extraordinary about working with someone who matched her standards without sharing her driving ambition. A paradox she couldn't quite resolve. The evening stretched into night as they completed the final calibrations. Elizabeth had arranged for dinner to be delivered to the hangar, a gesture of professional courtesy that evolved into something more personal as they sat amid tools and technical manuals, discussing aerospace innovations between bites of pasta. Jack checked his watch. I need to call Lily soon. Her bedtime routine. Elizabeth nodded. Use my office. More privacy. From her position by the aircraft, Elizabeth could see through the glass wall of the small airport office. She watched as Jack's serious expression transformed during his call with his daughter, his entire demeanor softening. He listened intently, then laughed at something Lily said, the sound carrying faintly through the hangar. Genuine, unguarded joy that startled Elizabeth with its authenticity. As their work concluded, Elizabeth insisted on driving Jack home rather than calling a taxi. It's nearly midnight, it's the least I can do. It's the least I can do. The modest apartment building above Main Street Diner stood in stark contrast to Elizabeth's waterfront penthouse. Jack invited her up with simple courtesy. I should check on Lily. You're welcome to come in for a moment. The apartment was small but impeccably organized. Engineering textbooks shared shelves with middle school novels and science kits. A wall displayed Lily's artwork and certificates, alongside a single framed photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes. Emma, Elizabeth presumed, feeling like an intruder in this private space. Lily's babysitter, an elderly neighbor, rose from the couch with a warm smile. She's been asleep for hours but insisted on finishing her science project first. Stubborn, just like her father. After the sitter departed, Jack quietly opened Lily's bedroom door, gesturing for Elizabeth to look. The sleeping 12-year-old was surrounded by books and notes, her breathing deep and peaceful. On her desk sat a meticulously constructed model aircraft, with hand-calculated specifications noted in precise handwriting. Jack ignored the fluctuating breath, handshakes, and she wants to build engines that don't use fossil fuels, Jack whispered as they retreated to the living room. Says my generation hasn't solved the problems that matter. Elizabeth noticed how he spoke about his daughter, not with the performative pride parents often displayed to strangers, but with genuine respect for her. As a person, her ideas, her determination. She reminds me of you, Elizabeth said without thinking. Jack looked surprised. How so? The precision in her work, the ambition to solve difficult problems. Elizabeth gestured toward the model aircraft. The refusal to accept conventional limitations. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared values beneath their different life choices. Jack offered coffee, and Elizabeth surprised herself by accepting, knowing her usual schedule would be disrupted tomorrow. As Jack moved about the small kitchen with efficient familiarity, Elizabeth found herself studying him not as an engineering anomaly or professional curiosity, but as a man who had built a life on principles she hadn't considered valid until now. Principles centered on presence rather than achievement, connection rather than acquisition. 3 days after the successful demonstration of the repaired aircraft, which had earned Morgan Aviation the provisional military contract, Elizabeth found herself at her desk, staring at an unsigned thank you note. Her assistant had prepared the standard appreciation letter they sent to all consultants, but something about its corporate formality felt wrong for Jack. After discarding 3 handwritten attempts, Elizabeth finally settled on a simple message. Your expertise was invaluable. Morgan Aviation would welcome your consultation on future projects. On your terms, respecting your priorities. She hesitated before adding a postscript in her precise handwriting. The modified thrust system has performed flawlessly. Your daughter would be proud of the engineering. A week passed before Jack's response arrived. Not an email or text, but a hand-delivered envelope that her assistant placed on her desk with raised eyebrows. Inside was a sketch of an innovative hydraulic system, with annotations in neat engineering script, alongside a brief note. A thought experiment for your new project. Lily suggested the alternative pressure valve configuration. Elizabeth found herself smiling at the unexpected collaboration between father and daughter. Acting on impulse, rather than her usual calculated decision-making, she picked up her phone and called Jack directly. Morgan Aviation is establishing a scholarship for young women in aerospace engineering, she said after brief pleasantries. I'd like to discuss having Lily in the first cohort, perhaps over coffee? Their meeting at Westridge's small bookstore cafe had been intended as a brief professional discussion. 2 hours later, they were still talking about engineering ethics, educational philosophy, and eventually, more personal matters. You never returned to aerospace after, Elizabeth hesitated. After Emma died, Jack finished simply. No, the hours weren't compatible with being the parent Lily needed. But you still design, Elizabeth noted, referencing the sketch he'd sent. Jack's expression softened. At night, sometimes. Old habits. You miss it? The cutting edge? The recognition? He considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I miss the resources, the collaboration, the chance to build something meaningful. His eyes met hers. But I'm building something meaningful now, too. Elizabeth understood he meant Lily, but something in his gaze suggested he might also be referring to this unexpected connection between them. Professional respect, evolving into something more personal, if not yet named. As weeks passed, their coffee meetings became regular occurrences. Elizabeth found herself scheduling trips to Westridge that previously would have been handled by subordinates. The scholarship program expanded, with Lily and 4 other girls receiving mentorship from Morgan Aviation's senior engineers. Jack occasionally consulted on specialized projects, his brilliant solutions implemented without him ever returning to corporate life. On a crisp autumn evening, as they walked from the cafe to Jack's apartment after discussing a particularly challenging engineering problem, Elizabeth finally addressed the unspoken shift in their relationship. We're colleagues with common interests, she began carefully, but I find myself looking forward to these discussions in a way that suggests more than professional compatibility. Jack smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that made Elizabeth realize how rare, genuine smiles were in her corporate world. I've noticed you've stopped checking your phone every 5 minutes, he observed. And Lily mentioned yesterday that she thinks it's weird but nice how often you're in Westridge these days. Observant like her father, Elizabeth replied, feeling uncharacteristically vulnerable. Jack's hand brushed against hers, not quite taking it, but intentional nonetheless. I've built my life around being present for what matters, he said quietly. And lately, these conversations matter to me too. The admission, simple as it was, represented a profound shift for both of them. Acknowledgement of connection neither had been seeking, but both now valued. 6 months later, Elizabeth stood in Morgan Aviation's main hangar, supervising final preparations for their annual industry showcase. The centerpiece exhibition, an innovative hybrid propulsion system, gleamed under specialized lighting, drawing admiring glances from early arrivals. Her assistant approached with last-minute schedule changes, then hesitated. Your guests have arrived. I've shown them to your office as requested. Elizabeth checked her watch, still 30 minutes before the official opening. Thank you. I'll be there shortly. In her office, she found Jack helping Lily adjust the display model she'd created for the Young Engineers exhibition that would run alongside the main event. At 12 and a half, Lily carried herself with growing confidence, her project demonstrating remarkable insight into sustainable aviation fuel alternatives. "The simulation runs perfectly," Lily informed Elizabeth without preamble, "and Dad checked my calculations twice." "I'd expect nothing less," Elizabeth replied, sharing a smile with Jack over his daughter's head. As Lily made final adjustments to her presentation, Jack moved to stand beside Elizabeth at the window, overlooking the busy hangar. "Having second thoughts about inviting the local mechanic to your prestigious industry event?" he asked quietly, the gentle teasing evidence of how far they'd come. Elizabeth shook her head. "On the contrary, the prestigious Dr. Harlow's presence adds considerable credibility to our engineering commitments." Jack's expression grew more serious. "I'm not returning to that world, Elizabeth, not even for you." "I'm not asking you to," she replied, surprising herself with how truly she meant it. "Morgan Aviation is establishing a flexible consulting division for engineers with family commitments, remote work, project-based contracts, school-hour scheduling." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like the efficiency-focused CEO I first met." "She's reconsidering certain priorities," Elizabeth admitted, her hand finding his. "Excellence doesn't always require sacrifice. Sometimes it requires balance." From across the room, Lily observed their clasped hands with the measured assessment of someone accustomed to careful observation. Her expression remained neutral, but she offered a small nod that Elizabeth suspected represented tentative approval. "Dear Samuel." Outside, guests began arriving in greater numbers. Elizabeth would soon need to assume her role as the polished, authoritative face of Morgan Aviation, but for this moment, she allowed herself to remain in this quiet space, between her past and a future that now held possibilities she hadn't previously permitted herself to imagine. Jack's fingers tightened briefly around hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding that some engines ran more powerfully at a sustainable pace than at full throttle. The most important journeys, after all, weren't measured in altitude or speed, but in the distance between who you were and who you might become.